The moment the pilot stepped into the aisle, the entire business class fell into a profound silence. His eyes locked onto a poorly dressed woman clutching a worn bag, her sandals dusty against the polished floor. "Ma'am, you'll have to move," he said, his voice firm, as quiet laughter rippled around her. She did not argue. She did not beg. She simply looked at him, calm and unshaken. No one noticed the subtle shift in the crew's expressions. No one realized the flight they were mocking her on belonged to her. And within minutes, the same man who ordered her away would wish he never had. And if stories like this move you, consider subscribing. As the day began in the city, it rose with layered sound, the distant call of drivers announcing routes, the metallic rattle of shop shutters lifting, the hum of generators kicking back to life after a brief power cut. The city breathed in movement, in struggle and ambition. And on that particular day, beneath a pale golden sky, a woman walks from slowly edge of it all. To everyone who passed her. Her name was Lena Hargrove. To the hurried eyes of strangers, she was just another poor woman navigating a city that had long stopped noticing people like her. Her dress was simple, faded at the edges, the kind of fabric that had been washed too many times in cold water and dried under harsh sun. Her sandals were worn thin, the straps slightly cracked. In one hand, she carried a small, old bag, not the kind that suggested travel, but survival. But there was something about her that did not match the story her appearance told. It was in the way she walked, not rushed, not uncertain, but steady. It was in her gaze, not lowered in shame, but calm, observant, as if she were taking in details others overlooked. And most of all, it was in her silence, a silence that was not empty but full as she approached Horizon International Airport. The contrast between her and the environment around her sharpened. Luxury cars rolled past the entrance, their tinted windows reflecting a world she seemed excluded from. Well-dressed travelers moved briskly, pulling sleek suitcases behind them, speaking into phones, checking watches, living in a rhythm of urgency and importance. Security guards stood tall at the entrance, scanning faces with practiced indifference. When Lena stepped closer, one of the guards glanced at her briefly, then looked again. There was a pause, not because he recognized her, but because she did not fit. "Madam," he said, his tone not harsh, but edged with suspicion. "Where are you going?" "To catch a flight?" Lena replied gently. Her voice was soft, steady, not defensive, not apologetic. The guard's eyes flicked to her bag, her sandals, her dress. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to laugh or question further. "Which airline?" he asked. Lena met his gaze without hesitation. "Valor Air." Something in her tone, or perhaps in her lack of hesitation, made him step aside, not out of respect but out of uncertainty. "Go," he said, waving her through, though his eyes followed her longer than necessary. Inside, the cool air conditioning wrapped around her like a different world. The polished floors gleamed under overhead lights. Digital boards flickered with departures and arrivals. The scent of coffee drifted from a nearby cafe where travelers sat with laptops and expensive luggage at their feet. And yet, as Lena walked through the terminal, she felt the shift almost instantly. Eyes. They came quietly at first, quick glances, then longer stares. A woman in a tailored suit paused mid-conversation, her brows knitting together. A young man in designer sneakers slowed his steps, looking her up and down, before exchanging a smirk with his friend. No one said anything out loud, but the judgment was loud enough. Lena did not react. She moved toward the check-in counters with the same calm rhythm, her fingers lightly gripping the handle of her small bag. Above the counters, screens displayed flight information, destinations like Lagos, Johannesburg, Nairobi, and among them her flight business class. When she reached the Valor Air counter, a neatly dressed attendant stood behind it, a young man named Julian Reese. His uniform was crisp, his posture upright, his smile professional. "Good day, ma'am," he said automatically without yet looking up from his screen. "And passport and ticket, please." Lena placed a neatly folded document on the counter. Julian reached for it casually, then paused. His eyes flicked over the worn edges of her sleeve, then down to the document in his hand. There was a brief, almost imperceptible shift in his expression. He opened the ticket. His fingers slowed. He read it once, then again. His brows furrowed slightly as if the information refused to align with what he was seeing. "Business class," he murmured under his breath, not quite meaning to say it out loud. Lena remained still. "Yes." Julian glanced up at her fully, now studying her face as if searching for confirmation that this was some kind of mistake. "Madam, this ticket," he began, then stopped himself. Around them, the line had grown. A few passengers leaned slightly, trying to see what was causing the delay. Julian forced a polite smile back onto his face. "Just a moment," he said, turning back to his screen. He typed quickly, then more slowly, then stopped. There it was again. No error, no mismatch. The system confirmed it. Clearly seat assignment, priority boarding, full clearance. But there was something else. A small detail in the corner of the screen, a symbol, not one he saw often. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He glanced at Lena again. She stood exactly as before, quiet, composed, patient. Too patient. "Is there a problem, she asked gently. Julian blinked. "No, ma'am, just verifying." He swallowed slightly, then printed the boarding pass. The machine hummed, the paper slid out. He handed it to her with both hands. Now a subtle shift in respect, though he did not fully understand why. "Gate 4, Hassedurcher," he said. "Boarding will begin shortly." Lena accepted it with a small nod. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, Julian's eyes dropped back to his screen, that symbol. He hovered his cursor over it. A restricted note appeared, partially hidden, requiring higher clearance. He could not open it, but the label beneath it was enough to unsettle him. "Executive access, internal priority." Julian leaned back slightly in his chair. He looked up again, scanning the crowd until he found her figure, moving slowly toward the departure gates. Something about this was not normal, not just unusual, wrong, or perhaps far more significant than it appeared. Behind him, another attendant leaned over. "What is wrong?" Julian hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. But his eyes drifted back to Lena, and for reasons he could not explain, a quiet thought settled in his chest. This woman is not who she looks like. Meanwhile, as Lena approached the seating area near Gate 4, the murmurs had already begun again. A group of well-dressed passengers sat nearby, their polished shoes tapping lightly against the floor, their voices low but sharp. One of them glanced at her openly this time. "Some people do not even try to hide it anymore," he muttered. Another chuckled. Lena heard. Of course she did. But she did not respond. Instead, she lowered herself gently into a seat at the edge of the waiting area, placing her bag beside her. Her eyes lifted briefly, not toward the people watching her, but toward the large window overlooking the runway. Planes moved slowly in the distance, their massive bodies gliding with quiet authority. For a moment, her expression softened, not with sadness, not with anger, but with something deeper. Memory, understanding, and something else. A quiet awareness of what was about to unfold. Behind the glass, the engines of a waiting aircraft began to roar to life. And inside the terminal, without anyone realizing it, the balance of power had already begun to shift. Boarding began with the familiar rhythm of controlled privilege. A calm voice echoed through the terminal speakers, calling for business class passengers first. Almost immediately, a small group rose with quiet confidence. Men in tailored suits, women in elegant dresses, polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. Their movements carried a subtle assurance, as if the world had always arranged itself in their favor. Lena remained seated for a moment longer, not because she had not heard the announcement, but because she was watching, observing. As people lined up, Subtle hierarchies revealed themselves in posture alone, who stepped forward without hesitation, who glanced around to confirm they belonged, who expected space to open for them without asking. When Lena finally stood, her movement drew attention again. Not loud attention, but sharp, the kind that cuts through silence. A woman near the front of the line turned her head. First, Madame Celeste Harrington. Her presence was unmistakable, draped in a carefully tailored outfit paired with expensive jewelry. Her posture radiated authority. Her handbag alone could pay a year's rent for most people in the terminal. Her eyes scanned people the way one evaluates possessions, quickly, decisively, without warmth. And when her gaze landed on Lena, it paused, then hardened. Celeste's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but something thinner. Disapproval. She leaned toward the man beside her. "This is getting ridiculous," she muttered, not bothering to lower her voice enough. The man followed her gaze, then let out a short, amused breath. "Business class these days," he said, trailing off with a shrug. Lena stepped into line anyway. No apology, no hesitation, just presence. That alone seemed to irritate Celeste more. As the line moved forward, boarding passes were scanned one by one. Soft beeps punctuated the air, each one granting entry into a space defined by comfort and exclusivity. When it was Lena's turn, the gate attendant, a young woman, took her pass with a polite but distracted smile. Then she looked up. Her smile faltered slightly. She scanned the pass. The machine beeped. Valid, but her eyes lingered on Lena longer than necessary. There was no outright refusal, no confrontation. But the pause was enough. Enough for the people behind to notice. Enough for whispers to begin again. "Are they checking properly?" someone murmured. "Look at her," another voice added, barely concealed. The attendant handed the pass back. "You may proceed, ma'am." Her tone was correct, but her eyes betrayed doubt. Lena accepted the pass with a small nod and walked forward into the jet bridge. Behind her, Celeste's voice rose slightly, sharper now. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the attendant. "Are you sure she's in the right section?" The attendant hesitated. That single moment of hesitation fed everything. "The system shows—" "Well, the system is wrong," Celeste cut in smoothly. "Or someone did not do their job properly." The man beside her chuckled again. "You never know these days." The attendant glanced down at the screen, then back toward the jet bridge where Lena had already disappeared. "I will inform the crew," she said quietly. And just like that, the seed of conflict moved ahead of Lena before she even reached her seat. Inside the aircraft, the air felt different. Cooler, quieter, the soft hum of the cabin wrapped around plush seats and carefully arranged spaces. Business class was not just about comfort. It was about separation, a quiet barrier between those who had and those who did not. Lena stepped inside slowly. Her eyes moved across the cabin with quiet familiarity. The arrangement, the spacing, the subtle design choices. Nothing surprised her, but she noticed everything. A flight attendant stood near the entrance, greeting passengers with a practiced smile. Her name tag read, "Brooke." "Welcome aboard," Brooke said warmly until she looked fully at Lena. There it was again. That flicker, surprise, then confusion, then something more controlled. Professional restraint. "Your seat, please?" Brooke asked gently. Lena handed over her boarding pass. Brooke glanced at it, and for a brief second her expression changed. Seat 2A, one of the most premium spots. Brooke looked up at Lena again, this time more carefully. There was something unusual here, not just the mismatch between appearance and seat, but something in Lena's eyes, calm. Too calm. "Right this way, ma'am." Her tone now more measured. She led Lena down the short aisle. And that is when the silence began to shift. Passengers already seated turned their heads one by one, subtle at first, then more openly. A man paused mid-sip of his drink. A woman lowered her sunglasses. Another leaned slightly into the aisle for a better look. And then Celeste Harrington entered behind them. She saw it immediately. saw Lena being led to the front to that seat. Her seat, the one directly beside her. "No," Celeste said sharply, her voice cutting through the calm like a blade. Brooke stopped, turned. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" she asked. Celeste stepped forward, her heels clicking with authority. "Yes, there is," she said. She pointed, not subtly, not politely, directly at Lena. "That woman is not sitting here." Yeah, the cabin went still. Not loud, not chaotic, but charged like the air before a storm. Brooke hesitated. "Ma'am, according to the boarding—" "I do not care what the boarding pass says, Celeste snapped. "This is business class." Her words hung heavy. Everyone understood what she meant, even if she did not say it directly. Lena stood beside the seat, her hands resting lightly on the handle of her bag. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply looked at Celeste. And that made it worse, because there was no fear in her eyes, no embarrassment, no urgency to defend herself, only stillness. Celeste's jaw tightened. "Are you going to fix this?" she said, turning back to Brooke. "Or should I call someone who will?" The man beside her leaned back, watching with interest. "This should be interesting," he murmured. Brooke felt the pressure immediately, the expectations, the hierarchy, the unspoken rules. Her training told her to maintain order, to protect the experience of premium passengers, to avoid conflict. But something about this situation did not sit right. She looked at Lena again, really looked this time. And for a brief moment, doubt crept in. Not about the ticket, but about everything else. "Ma'am," Brooke said carefully to Celeste, "if you could just give me a moment." "No," Celeste said flatly. I will not." Her voice dropped slightly, colder now. "I paid for comfort, not this." A few passengers shifted in their seats, some nodding subtly in agreement. Others said nothing but did not object either. Silence once again took a side. Brooke's fingers tightened slightly around the boarding pass still in her hand. This was escalating, and there was only one way to resolve it. "I will call the captain," she said finally. Celeste gave a small, satisfied nod. "Do that." Brooke turned and moved quickly toward the cockpit. Behind her, the cabin remained frozen in tension. Lena stood exactly where she was, still quiet, watching not the people, but the moment, as if she had seen it before, as if she already knew how it would end. And as the cockpit door opened, the next decision would change everything. Captain Damon Fletcher had spent nearly 20 years learning how to make fast decisions without showing emotion. In aviation, hesitation could become danger in seconds. So he had trained himself to respond to tension the way seasoned pilots often did, with a controlled face, a steady tone, and a mind that sorted people into categories before they even finished speaking. Emergency or inconvenience, risk or routine, problem or delay. When Brooke knocked softly and stepped into the cockpit, he was reviewing final departure checks with his first officer. He turned only halfway at first, expecting a minor complaint about luggage space or a seatbelt issue, but one look at her face told him this was no ordinary request. "What is it?" he asked. "There is a problem in business class," Brooke said carefully. "A passenger is refusing to sit because another passenger is in the seat next to her." He exhaled lightly, already annoyed. "Then resolve it. That is what the cabin crew is for." Brooke hesitated. "I tried, sir. The passenger being challenged has a valid boarding pass for seat 2A. That made him look up fully, and Brooke chose her next words slowly. "The issue is the other passenger believes she does not belong in business class." He stared at her for a second longer than necessary. He understood immediately, not because he approved of it, but because he had seen versions of it before. Appearance, class, assumptions dressed as complaints. He rubbed one hand briefly over his jaw. "Who is the complaining passenger?" "Madame Celeste Harrington." At that, something shifted. He knew the name. Most people in corporate circles did. Celeste Harrington was wealthy, connected, outspoken, and the sort of customer airlines hated to offend. The kind who knew board members by first name, who sent emails that reached the top floor before a plane even landed, who could turn a small incident into a week of reputational trouble. His face hardened almost imperceptibly. "And the other passenger? Lena Hargrove," Brooks said. The name meant nothing to him. Not yet. He leaned back slightly in his seat. "Has the boarding pass been verified?" "Yes, sir, it's scanned properly." Then she explained that to Madam Harrington. "I did, sir." And Brooks swallowed. "She wants you." Of course she did. He glanced toward the closed cockpit door, already feeling the invisible clock pressing against his patience. Departure times, crew coordination, airport traffic. Every unnecessary delay had a cost. And in his experience, the fastest way to stop a premium cabin conflict was not always the fairest way. It was simply the quickest. "Fine," he said at last. "I will handle it." He stood, adjusted the front of his uniform, and stepped out of the cockpit with the posture of a man used to command. As he walked through the short aisle into business class, the energy met him before the scene did. The passengers had gone quiet, but not naturally quiet. This was the silence people wore when they wanted to witness a humiliation without appearing involved in it. His eyes found Celeste first. She was standing near her seat, one hand resting on the armrest, chin slightly lifted, the picture of controlled outrage. Then his gaze shifted to the woman beside seat 2. Lena. For half a second he simply took in the visual facts. Worn dress, old bag, dust on sandals, no visible signs of wealth, no polished confidence of elite travel, no performance of belonging. She looked exactly like the kind of passenger who would normally never step into a business class cabin unless something had gone wrong. And because he noticed that first, he did not notice the rest. Not the steadiness in her eyes, not the absence of panic in her body, not the quiet composure that should have made him ask more questions. He saw the surface, and his judgment arrived before his curiosity. "Good day, Ann," he said, addressing the cabin generally, though his eyes returned to Lena. "I understand there is a seating issue." Celeste answered before anyone else could. "Captain, thank you. Yes, there is. This woman has been placed here beside me, and I am sure you can see the problem." He kept his expression neutral. "Ma'am, please let the crew explain." "With respect," Celeste said, her voice smooth but sharpened by disdain. "I do not need an explanation. I need this corrected." The other passengers watched him closely. Now Captain Fletcher knew what they expected. Order, speed, authority, no disruption. He turned to Brooke and held out his hand. She gave him the boarding pass. He looked at it. Seat 2A confirmed. He frowned slightly, then looked back at Lena. "Madam, may I see your identification?" Lena opened her bag without protest and handed over a passport. He glanced at it, then compared the name. Everything matched. For a brief instant, the simplest, most ethical path stood clearly in front of him. Return the documents, confirm her seat, instruct everyone else to settle down and move on. But ethics often become fragile when mixed with pressure, ego, and image. He could already imagine the tension continuing through takeoff. Celeste refusing to cooperate. Complaints filed, calls made. An ugly scene recorded on someone's phone. Social media clips stripped of context, chaos on Valor Air premium flight. Captain ignores distressed VIP passenger. He had seen smaller issues become career headaches. And right there in that tight cabin full of watching eyes, he made the decision that would haunt him later. He handed the passport back to Lena. "Madam," he said, keeping his tone formally polite, "there appears to have been a seating complication. We will arrange another comfortable seat for you in economy." The words landed like a slap disguised as courtesy. Brooke's head turned sharply toward him. He silenced her with a brief glance. Celeste did not smile, but satisfaction settled visibly into her posture. One of the passengers behind her let out a quiet breath that sounded dangerously close to amusement. Lena accepted her passport with calm fingers. She did not ask why. She did not defend herself. She did not point out that her ticket was valid. She only looked at him for a long moment, and in that look there was no pleading at all. That unsettled him more than resistance would have. "I was assigned this seat," she said softly. He kept his shoulders squared. "I understand, madam. We apologize for the inconvenience, but this is the best solution to avoid delaying the flight." It sounded reasonable. That was the problem. Injustice often sounds reasonable when spoken in a polished tone. Lena's eyes did not leave his face. "To avoid delaying the flight," she repeated quietly. "Yes, not to do what is right." The cabin seemed to shrink around those words. He felt several passengers shift, but he did not allow himself to react. "We are trying to maintain order," he said. Lena nodded once, almost to herself. "Order." Celeste crossed her arms. "Honestly, Captain, this should never have become a discussion." Brooke took one small step forward. "Sir, with respect, her boarding pass—" "I have made a decision," Captain Fletcher said. His voice was not raised, but it was final. Brooke fell silent, though her face changed. Not rebellion, not open anger. Something quieter, disappointment. He turned back to Lena. "A crew member will assist you." For a moment, no one moved. Then Lena bent slightly, picked up her old bag, and stepped away from seat 2A. She did it with so much dignity that the ugliness of the moment became more visible, not less. No scene, no tears, no begging. Only a woman being displaced in front of an entire cabin because her appearance made others uncomfortable. As she began walking down the aisle toward the economy section, a few passengers looked away. Not from shame deep enough to stop what was happening, but from the smaller shame of not wanting to see themselves inside it. Celeste lowered herself into her seat, satisfied now, adjusting the folds of her outfit as if order had been restored. He gave a short nod to the cabin. "Thank you for your cooperation." He turned and headed back toward the cockpit. But before he reached the curtain dividing business class from the rest of the aircraft, he glanced back once. Lena had paused briefly in the aisle, not because she was confused, not because she needed help, but because she was looking at him again. There was no anger in her face. That was what disturbed him. Had she looked humiliated, he could have filed the moment away as unfortunate but manageable. Had she looked furious, he could have prepared for a complaint. But what he saw instead was something much harder to dismiss. Recognition, not of him as a person, but of the kind of choice he had just made. As if she had seen men like him before, educated, respected, efficient men who did wrong with clean hands and calm voices. Then she moved on. Brooke followed after her, carrying the weight of something she could not yet name. Captain Fletcher stepped back into the cockpit, but the cabin no longer felt like a problem he had solved. It felt like a mistake that had not finished revealing itself, and somewhere behind him, as the final boarding door prepared to close, the quiet beginning of consequence had already taken its seat. The economy cabin was nearly full by the time Lena reached it. The narrow aisle was crowded with elbows, half-lifted bags, restless children, and the thick impatience that always settled over passengers forced to share too little space for too long. Overhead, bins opened and slammed. A baby cried somewhere near the middle rows. Two men argued softly about who had taken whose armrest before they had even sat down. The air smelled of fabric, perfume, tiredness, and recycled breath. It was a different world from the polished stillness of business class. And yet, when Lena stepped into it, something about her remained untouched by the downgrade. She still moved with the same measured calm, her old bag held close to her side, her eyes taking in the cabin, not like a woman defeated, but like someone storing away a truth she had already expected to find. Brooke followed her, carrying the burden of the moment more heavily than the small baggage tag scanner in her hand. "Madam," she said gently, lowering her voice so nearby passengers would not hear too clearly, "I am very sorry." Lena stopped beside an empty seat several rows back. It was not even a good economy seat. Middle section, limited legroom, no privacy, no dignity of space, just one more narrow rectangle in a long chain of compromise. She turned to Brooke and studied her face. The young flight attendant looked shaken now, not merely embarrassed on behalf of the airline, but disturbed in a deeper way. The kind of disturbance that comes when a person sees their workplace stop pretending to be fair. "You did not make the decision," Lena said quietly. Brooke swallowed. "I still stood there while it happened." That honesty changed something. Lena looked at her for another moment, then gave the faintest nod. "Yes," she said, "you did." Brooke lowered her eyes. The truth of it stung because it was simple. She had not insulted Lena. She had not demanded anything. But she had stepped back when it mattered most, like so many decent people do when authority enters the room and gives cruelty a polished name. "I wanted to say something," Brooke whispered. Lena's expression did not harden. If anything, it softened with a kind of weary understanding. Wanting is not always the same as doing. The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they landed heavily. A man seated across the aisle glanced up briefly, curious, then looked away. To him, Lena was just another passenger with a problem. To Brooke, she was becoming something far more difficult to explain. "I can bring you some water," Brooke offered quickly, almost as if she needed to do something before the shame fully settled into her bones. Lena shook her head. "No, thank you." Then, without drama, she placed her bag beneath the seat and sat down. A woman beside the window gave her one quick, suspicious glance, then turned back toward her phone. The man on her other side shifted his legs slightly inward as though afraid her presence might somehow spill into his comfort. No one said anything openly cruel. They did not need to. Human beings had 1,000 ways of communicating exclusion without moving their lips much at all. Brooke remained standing for a second too long. "Please fasten your seatbelt, ma'am," she said automatically because routine was easier than conscience. Lena clicked the belt into place. Brooke walked away, but not with the posture of a crew member who had completed a task. She walked like someone leaving behind a question that would soon return larger. Back in the forward galley, the other cabin crew were preparing for departure. Final cross-checks, safety confirmations, cabin secure. A senior attendant named Dana glanced at Brooke as she approached. "So, settled?" Dana asked. Brooke nodded once, but the motion lacked conviction. Dana continued organizing service items. "Good. Madame Harrington is difficult. Better to calm her now than deal with a report later." Brooke stared at her. That was her understanding of what happened. Dana finally looked up. "What else should it be?" Brooke exhaled slowly, trying to contain herself. A woman had a valid business class seat. She was removed because another passenger did not like how she looked. Dana's face barely changed. "Welcome to customer service." "No." Brooke said, "That is not customer service." Dana shut a compartment with more force than necessary. "Listen, you are new enough to still be surprised by these things. People with money complain. Airlines protect revenue. Captains protect departure time. None of that is noble, but none of it is new." Brooke's hands clenched at her sides. "Does that make it acceptable?" Dana gave her a tired look. "Acceptable and common are not the same thing." "Then why are we acting like it was normal?" Dana's voice lowered. "Because this job does not ask what your conscience thinks every 5 minutes. It asks whether the cabin is under control." Brooke said nothing. The older attendant softened, but only slightly. "You want to survive in this industry? Learn when to speak." Brooke thought of Lena's calm face. Wanting is not always the same as doing. That sentence had already started working on her from the inside. Meanwhile, several rows behind the curtain, Lena sat with her hands folded loosely in her lap. The aircraft door had closed. Safety demonstration screens lit up overhead. Across the aisle, a little boy leaned against his mother's shoulder, sleepy and curious. An elderly man struggled quietly with a seatbelt until Lena leaned over and fastened it for him without a word. "Thank you," he murmured. She nodded. There was no bitterness in the gesture. No need to prove anything, just an instinctive kindness that had survived humiliation, without asking permission. As the engines deepened in sound and the aircraft began to push back, Lena looked out through the small window across the row. The runway lights blurred softly against the brightness of the sun. Her face remained unreadable to anyone watching, but inside her memory had already begun to stir. Not just memory of being poor, memory of being dismissed, of rooms where she had not been heard until her title arrived before her, of offices where men had spoken over her until they discovered her signature could approve or kill a deal, of watching people become respectful only after money translated her humanity into a language they were willing to understand. There had been a time when such moments burned hotter inside her, a time when she would go home and feel the insult for days, replaying every glance, every tone, every false apology. But years had changed the shape of the wound. It no longer surprised her. What unsettled her still was how ordinary it remained. Ahead of her, beyond the curtain, Captain Damon Fletcher ran through departure procedures with practiced focus. His hands moved with efficiency. His voice remained steady in communication with the control tower. On the surface, he had already folded the incident into the category of resolved issues, but not completely. Something about the woman's eyes had followed him into the cockpit. He found himself recalling the way she had repeated his words. To avoid delaying the flight, not to do what is right. She had not argued like a victim. She had observed him like a witness. He adjusted a control setting more sharply than intended. His first officer noticed. "You okay?" Yes, Captain Fletcher said too quickly. The other man nodded and returned to his instruments. His jaw tightened slightly. He had made practical decisions his whole career. That was how people survived responsibility. You could not let every messy human conflict enter your chest, or it would interfere with clarity. Yet this one would not settle. Maybe because the woman had not behaved as expected. Maybe because Brooke's face had shown disapproval. Or maybe because somewhere beneath his professional logic he knew exactly when a decision stopped being practical and became cowardly. The aircraft began taxiing. Cabin crew took their jump seats. Brooke strapped herself in, but her mind remained fixed on row 19. She replayed the sequence again and again. The valid boarding pass, the hesitation, the captain's choice, the passenger's silence, her own silence, and threaded through all of it. One detail felt more troubling each time she examined it. Lena had not been surprised, not truly, as though she had met this kind of injustice too many times to waste energy reacting to it, as though the scene had confirmed something she already knew about people. Brooke looked toward the economy cabin through the narrow angle available from her seat. She could not see Lena directly from there, but she felt with growing certainty that this moment was not over. It had only changed cabins. And while the plane gathered speed on the runway, carrying everyone forward into the sky, the truth that had been pushed aside in business class was not disappearing. It was waiting quietly, like the woman now seated among ordinary passengers with an extraordinary stillness in her eyes, waiting for the right moment to rise. By the time the aircraft leveled above the clouds, the outward tension inside the cabin had softened into something quieter but not cleaner. Business class had returned to its polished illusion of calm. Glasses of juice had been placed on tray tables, laptops were opening, seatbacks had reclined slightly. Celeste Harrington sat with the composed expression of a woman who believed inconvenience had been corrected in her favor. She even accepted her pre-departure drink with the faint smile of someone reassured that the world still knew where to place people. But beneath that surface, a small disturbance remained. It lived in Brooke. It followed her as she moved through the aisle, checking seatbelts, then through the galley as service preparation began, then into the narrow crew station where routine tasks should have settled her nerves. Instead, each step seemed only to sharpen the same thought. Something about Lena Hargrove did not fit the story everyone had chosen for her. Brooke had worked enough flights to recognize many kinds of passengers. The wealthy who wanted to appear humble, The insecure who overperformed confidence, the tired who became rude because they believed service staff existed to absorb their frustration. She had learned quickly that money changed posture, tone, even impatience. But Lena had shown none of the signs, no frantic self-defense, no attempts to prove she belonged, no appeal to status. Even people who were falsely humiliated usually reacted somehow. Anger, shame, confusion, panic. Lena had shown none of those fully. She had only watched, listened, and then moved with a quiet that felt less like defeat and more like restraint. That thought would not leave Brooke alone. During the first round of service, she finished her section as quickly as possible, then returned to the small galley terminal used by cabin crew for passenger records and seat management. It was not meant for curiosity. It was meant for operations, meal counts, special requests, flight notes, medical flags, loyalty status. Still, she looked around once to make sure no one was watching too closely, then typed in the seat number that had started all of this. 2A. The screen brought up the booking record. Lena Hargrove? She clicked. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Standard ticket details, full fare, business class, no meal issue, no accessibility note, no listed companion. But then her eyes moved downward to a field that most crew rarely noticed because it was usually empty. Priority handling code AX1. Brooke frowned. She had seen codes before: VIP, diplomatic, security sensitive, medical. But AX1 was unfamiliar. It was not one of the codes regularly taught in training for everyday cabin service. She clicked again. A small lock icon appeared beside a line of text. Restricted internal designation. Higher authorization required. Her pulse shifted. She tried another window. The same result. Not accessible. Brooke leaned closer to the screen. Maybe she had misread it. She entered the passenger name manually this time. The same file appeared, but another detail surfaced in the corner. Tiny, easy to miss, unless one was already searching for strangeness. Station override disabled. Refer to operations director or executive desk. Brooke stared. Her mind immediately began arranging possibilities. Government official traveling discreetly, relative of a board member, undercover audit passenger. The airline occasionally ran anonymous quality checks, though not usually with locked records and internal restriction warnings. She clicked through the booking trail. The ticket had not been purchased through a public portal. It had been issued through a direct internal channel. Her breath slowed. That was not normal at all. Brooke! She jolted and turned. Dana was standing at the galley entrance, arms folded. What are you doing? Brooke minimized the screen almost too quickly. Checking service notes. Dana's eyes narrowed. For half a passenger file. Brooke hesitated. Lying badly would only worsen things. I'm trying to understand why her booking was marked that way. Dana stepped closer. Let it go. She was removed from her assigned seat, and the system is telling me she is not an ordinary passenger. Dana looked at the screen, then back at Brooke. Exactly why you should stop digging. The words were quiet, but sharp. Brooke felt something tighten inside her. You already knew there was something unusual. I know enough to mind my role. That is not an answer. No, Dana said evenly, and it is survival. Brooke lowered her voice. If we mishandled a protected passenger, should not someone know? Dana gave a dry laugh. Someone will know if it matters. The sentence chilled her more than if Dana had raised her voice, because beneath it was another truth. In organizations like this, important information traveled upward, whether ordinary people chose courage or not. But the moral weight of silence still remained with those who stayed quiet. Brooke turned back to the screen and reopened the file. I need to see more. Dana's tone hardened. And then what? March into the cockpit and tell the captain he may have offended someone powerful. You think that will end well for you? Brooke did not answer. Dana, aside, listened to me carefully. You are not the first person to witness something unjust at 30,000 feet. Airlines do not reward emotional heroics. If this passenger is important, headquarters will handle it. If she is not, then you will only make yourself a problem. Brooke stared at the name on the screen. Lena Hargrove. Something about seeing it there linked to locked systems and internal codes made the business class incident feel suddenly smaller and more dangerous at the same time. Smaller because the truth might already be much bigger than that aisle humiliation. More dangerous because if Lena was connected to the airline in some serious way, then the mistake was no longer merely personal. It was institutional. Why would someone so important travel dressed like that? Brooke murmured almost to herself. Dana shrugged once. Maybe she had no choice. Maybe she wanted no attention. Maybe rich people also have reasons we do not understand. No, Brooke said softly, thinking back to Lena's years. She wanted attention, just not the kind they gave her. Dana said nothing to that. A call light flashed from the cabin, and Dana turned away to handle it. Close the file, she said before leaving, and do your job. But Brooke did not close it. Not immediately. Instead, she copied the code AX-1 onto a small notepad from the galley drawer. Then she logged out and straightened up, forcing her expression back into professional neutrality. Her hands were colder than before. In the economy cabin, Lena sat quietly while drink service began. A plastic cup of water rested on her tray table. The little boy across the aisle had fallen asleep against his mother's shoulder. The elderly man whose seatbelt she had fastened earlier was now reading an old newspaper, squinting at the print. Everything around her was ordinary again. That was often how injustice hid best inside normal continuation. No announcement had been made about what happened. No one around her knew she had been moved from business class, or if some guessed, they likely assumed she had boarded wrongly and been corrected. Human beings are comfortable with explanations that protect hierarchy. They rarely inspect them unless pain forces them to. Lena folded her hands and closed her eyes for a moment. Not in sleep, in thought. She had taken flights on Valor Air many times before, though rarely like this. Usually her office handled every detail. Usually her travel became invisible in the opposite direction. Too much difference. Too much special treatment. Too many polished smiles preparing themselves before she arrived. On those trips, she learned little about the true soul of her company because people behaved for power. Today, she had chosen something else. No escort, no executive notice, no announcement, no intervention. She had wanted to see, and now she had. Across the curtain, Celeste Harrington pressed her call button for more sparkling water and resumed speaking loudly into her phone before being reminded that airborne calls were not permitted. In the cockpit, Captain Damon Fletcher reviewed crew procedures, but felt his concentration fracture again and again around the same image. Worn sandals on polished cabin carpet. He disliked that the image had stayed with him. It suggested conscience, and conscience was inconvenient when one had already committed to a decision. Yet even he could not entirely dismiss a growing unease. Business class seating disputes happened. Class prejudice happened. But something about the attendant's hesitation, the valid documents, the woman's composure, it all now felt less like a contained problem and more like a sealed door with pressure building behind it. Back in the galley, Brooke finished service, then waited for a moment when no one needed her. She took the notepad from her pocket and looked again at the code she had written, a X1. A memory surfaced faintly from training orientation, a passing mention from an older supervisor who had laughed while listing categories of passengers' crew would likely never knowingly encounter. Diplomats, ministers, anonymous auditors, major ownership principles traveling under internal protocol. Ownership principles. Brooke's eyes widened slightly. No, that seemed impossible. And yet, impossible things rarely arrived wearing expensive clothing. They arrived exactly like this, disguised by expectation, hidden in plain sight because nobody believed to look beyond appearances. Her heart began to beat faster. She needed confirmation, real confirmation, not speculation. And the only place she might find it without alerting the whole chain of command was the crew's secondary operations tablet used for escalations and special service coordination. Access was limited but not fully locked from senior cabin staff when linked to passenger welfare. She waited until Dana moved to the aft cabin. Then Brooke reached for the tablet. The next answer she knew could change everything. The tablet was heavier than Brooke expected, not in weight, but in consequence. She stood alone in the narrow space between the galley compartments, one hand braced lightly against the storage wall as the aircraft moved through a faint patch of turbulence. Around her, the usual sounds continued. The soft clink of service trays, the hum of ventilation, the muffled conversation of passengers who had already returned to their own lives. But for Brooke, the flight had narrowed into a single point of tension. She entered her crew authorization. The tablet opened to the operations dashboard. Carefully, she searched the passenger file again. Lena Hargrove. For a second, the screen seemed to pause. Then a restricted notice appeared. This record contains executive-level confidentiality markers. Access permitted only for welfare or incident escalation. Continue? Brooke hesitated. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She knew that if she pressed forward, there would be a digital trace. Someone somewhere would be able to see that she had entered a file above her usual clearance. It was not a reckless act exactly. The system had offered her the option, but it was not casual either. It meant she was now choosing truth over comfort. She pressed continue. The screen shifted, and then the world she had been standing in. The ordinary, cruelly simple world where a poorly-looking woman had been moved from business class to economy, cracked open. At the top of the file beneath the name was a designation in unmistakable bold text. Lena Hargrove, founder and majority owner of Valor Air Holdings, traveling without executive escort by direct personal instruction. Brooke stopped breathing for a moment. Her eyes moved lower, disbelieving, scanning again as if the words might rearrange themselves. They did not. There was a formal internal note beneath the profile. Passenger often travels discreetly to observe live service culture, staff conduct, and operational truth beyond managed executive environments. Do not announce identity unless directly authorized by passenger. Any irregularity affecting passenger dignity, safety, or assigned access must be escalated immediately to Executive Operations Desk. Brooke's fingers tightened around the tablet. The cabin seemed to tilt though the plane itself was steady. Founder, majority owner. The woman sitting quietly in economy with a plastic cup of water on her tray table was not merely wealthy. She was the airline. Brooke leaned back against the wall, heart pounding now, with a force that felt almost physical. Every piece of the day slammed into place at once, the locked code, the internal booking channel, the calm, the absence of panic, the way Lena had watched everything unfold, as if she had seen human beings reveal themselves this way before. Because she had, not once, many times. And suddenly Brooke understood something else, too. Lena had not fought because she had never needed the seat to prove her worth. The seat had only been the mirror. Everyone else had revealed themselves in front of it. Brooke closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them again and read the rest of the file because now she needed to know who this woman really was beyond title. The brief executive biography was written in the dry language of corporate records, but even within that restrained style, an extraordinary life could be seen. Born in a crowded fishing settlement outside Cape Coast, raised partly by a mother who sold smoked fish and partly by a grandmother who kept other people's children while their parents worked. Father deceased early. Scholarship student. Former airport cleaner while attending evening classes. Later logistics coordinator, then aviation finance strategist. Founder of a regional cargo network that grew into passenger operations after a decade of disciplined expansion. Brooke kept reading. By the age of 45, Lena Hargrove had built one of the most respected aviation groups, not the largest, not the loudest, but one of the few that had survived without becoming a playground for vanity, corruption, or political patronage. Her reputation in business journalism was unusual. People described her as exacting, private, hard to impress, and fiercely loyal to ordinary staff. She had funded scholarships for girls in rural districts, established widow support cooperatives near Tamale, and quietly paid medical bills for retired cleaners whose names most executives would never know. And yet she often moved without public performance. No social media parade, no magazine glamour campaigns, no entourage unless necessary. Brooke stared at the screen as if it might answer the question now rising inside her. How does a woman build all this and still choose to walk through the world looking like someone people will disrespect? The answer came from a line buried deeper in the internal notes, one clearly written by a long-serving executive assistant. Ms. Hargrove believes organizations only know their real culture when power is absent from the room. She occasionally travels unannounced in plain dress to observe how staff treat the unknown, the inconvenient, and the poor. Brooke felt heat gather behind her eyes, not from sentiment, from shame, because she had witnessed the test and her company had failed it. Worse, she had stood inside the failure and let rank speak louder than truth. A sudden memory surfaced from earlier in the day, the way Lena had said, wanting is not always the same as doing. It hit harder now. Brooke locked the screen and stood very still. Then memory, imagination, and what she had just read began forming a picture of Lena's life more vividly than any corporate summary ever could. She saw almost as if the scenes were unfolding before her, a younger Lena in a faded school uniform standing outside a classroom. While other children laughed at the patched knees on her dress, she saw her mother bargaining in a hot market, counting coins twice before buying kerosene, apologizing to children for meals that were too small. She saw Lena studying under unreliable light, then waking before dawn to help carry basins, then returning to books because poverty had never once politely waited for ambition. She imagined the airport years later, not as an owner, but as a cleaner. Quiet shoes on polished floors before sunrise, uniform sleeves rolled, a mop in hand, invisible in the very space where now people would bow if they knew her name. Brooke could almost feel what that must have been like. Overhearing executives complain about service while stepping around the workers who made service possible. Watching passengers dismiss cleaners with the entitlement of people who believe dignity should come dressed in expensive fabric. And somewhere in those years, the pieces had begun joining. A woman who understood movement, cargo, routes, timing, people, risk. A woman who learned that airports were not just buildings, but living systems where those at the top rarely saw what the bottom carried every day. The corporate file could not capture the real struggle, but Brooke could sense it anyway. The loans refused because she was a woman. The meetings where men had smiled indulgently until numbers proved them fools. The nights of choosing payroll over rest. The humiliation of being underestimated. The discipline required to turn vision into infrastructure when every delay cost money and every failure could bury a dream. And perhaps that was why Lena still dressed simply when she wanted truth. Because once you had cleaned an airport floor, you never fully forgot what people revealed when they thought you were beneath them. Brooke's throat tightened. In the forward cabin, Madame Celeste Harrington laughed softly at something on her phone, fully unaware that the woman she had displaced owned every polished surface around her. Every stitched headrest cover, every branded napkin, every route agreement that allowed this aircraft to cross the sky. Captain Damon Fletcher, in the cockpit, sat at the controls of a plane flown under the authority of a woman he had sent to economy to maintain order. There was something almost unbearable about the irony, yet Lena herself had created the conditions for it. She had chosen not to arrive wrapped in status. She had chosen to be seen the way poor women are often seen, suspicious, inconvenient, out of place, and in return, the people around her had not merely made a mistake. They had confessed their values. Brooke unlocked the tablet again and found another note from Executive Operations. If identity becomes known during flight, de-escalate, with discretion and contact ground executive response before landing. Passenger preference may override public correction. Brooke let out a slow breath. So even now there was a choice. Truth could still be handled quietly or badly or too late. She looked toward the curtain leading to business class, then toward the cabin behind her, where Lena sat among ordinary travelers without announcing that she owned the aircraft carrying them all. It would have been easy, Brooke realized, for Lena to demand attention the moment she was challenged. To speak one name, make one call, lift one title, and watch everyone scramble. But she had not. Because this was never only about a seat. It was about the soul of the company, and perhaps in a deeper way about the soul of the people inside it. Brooke slipped the tablet back into its compartment, but her hands no longer trembled with uncertainty. What replaced that feeling was worse and clearer. Urgency. Not just because someone powerful had been humiliated, but because a human being had been wronged, and power had only made that visible. Dana returned to the galley and stopped when she saw Brooke's face. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Brooke looked at her. Then, with a voice so low it almost disappeared into the hum of the cabin, she said, "Do you know who Lena Hargrove is?" Dana's expression changed instantly, not confusion, recognition, and fear. That was all the answer Brooke needed. "She is the owner," Brooke whispered. Dana closed her eyes briefly, as if the truth she had been trying not to touch had finally stepped into the room. For a long second, neither woman spoke. Then Brooke turned toward the cockpit. The time for silence, she knew, had ended. For several long seconds, Brooke and Dana stood in the narrow forward galley without speaking, the soft hum of the aircraft pressing around them like a warning. Neither woman could ignore the message from Executive Operations still glowing on the tablet screen. "Do not disclose passenger identity publicly. Maintain standard service. Captain must be informed discreetly by senior cabin crew. Ground executive response team will meet aircraft on arrival. Confirm passenger condition and whether owner has requested intervention." Owner. Even now, the word did not feel real. Dana looked away first. Her face had changed in a way Brooke had never seen before. The older flight attendant, who had spent the last hour speaking in the flat, practical language of survival, suddenly looked much older, as though years of swallowing small injustices had all gathered at once in her chest. Brooke broke the silence. "You knew something was wrong." Dana let out a slow breath. "I knew this was bigger than a seating issue. I did not know it was this." Brooke's eyes dropped to the screen again. "What do we do now?" Dana straightened slightly, though her shoulders were still tense. "First, we stop panicking. Then we do exactly what they told us to do." "That sounds too calm for what happened." "It has to sound calm," Dana said. "We are on a plane in the sky. Panic helps no one." But Brooke could hear the strain beneath her voice. Dana was not calm. She was contained. A service bell chimed from the business class cabin. Somewhere beyond the curtain, someone wanted more water, more ice, more comfort, more proof that the world remained arranged in their favor. The sound felt almost obscene now. Brooke looked toward the cockpit. "You have to tell him." "Yes?" "And what if he tries to hide it?" Dana's gaze sharpened. "Then he will make the mistake worse." Brooke folded her arms tightly across herself. "He already did." Dana did not disagree. For a moment, both women turned toward the economy cabin. They could not see Lena from where they stood, but her presence seemed to fill the aircraft more strongly now than any passenger speaking out loud. The founder and majority owner of Valor Air was sitting in an ordinary seat among ordinary people, wearing a faded dress, eating a basic in-flight meal, while her own staff tried to decide how to respond to the humiliation she had endured from them. And what unsettled Brooke most was not Lena's power. It was her silence. If Lena had wanted instant revenge the moment business class rejected her, she could have spoken a few words and changed the temperature of the aircraft. She could have demanded a satellite call to headquarters. She could have made the captain apologize in front of everyone. She could have stopped the performance before it fully revealed anyone's character. But she had not. She had watched. And because she had watched, everyone had shown themselves. Dana finally picked up the tablet, locked it, and slid it back into its holder. "I am going to speak to her first." Brooke blinked. "Before the captain?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because Executive Operations asked whether she has requested intervention, and because I need to know what kind of silence this is." Brooke frowned, but she understood. There was a difference between silence forced by humiliation and silence chosen for a reason. And with Lena, everything now suggested choice. Dana smoothed the front of her uniform and walked toward the economy cabin. Brooke followed a few steps behind, then stopped near the curtain. She did not want to intrude. This moment belonged first to Lena. The aisle in economy was crowded with trays, half-finished drinks, and the weary restlessness of mid-flight. A little boy leaned sleepily against his mother. An elderly man adjusted his blanket. Two students whispered over a shared phone. Life continued in the plane, the undramatic way it often does around deep injustice. Most people on board had no idea that the center of the story was sitting among them, quiet as if nothing had happened. Lena was near the middle section, seated upright, her tray table still down. The remains of her meal sat neatly arranged. She had folded the napkin after using it. Her old bag rested beneath the seat in front of her. Dana stopped beside her row. "Madam?" she said softly. Lena looked up. There was no surprise in her face, only a calm attention that made Dana suddenly aware of every unworthy impulse she had hidden behind professionalism. "May I speak with you?" Dana asked. Lena studied her for a brief moment. "You may." Dana glanced at the passengers nearby, then lowered her voice. "Privately, if possible." Lena looked toward the seatbelt sign, which was off. Then she unfastened her belt and rose without hurry. She stepped into the small open space near the galley entrance, not fully private, but removed enough from the nearest ears. Brooke watched from a distance, pulse tight in her throat. Dana clasped her hands lightly in front of her, a posture of control that did nothing to hide her discomfort. "Madam, I need to apologize." Lena said nothing. Dana continued, choosing honesty over polished phrases. "What happened to you should not have happened. You had a valid seat. You were treated unfairly, and I allowed the situation to move forward when I should have done more." Lena's face remained still. "Why are you saying this now?" The question was quiet, not sharp, not emotional, which somehow made it harder. Dana answered truthfully. "Because now I understand more than I did." A pause settled between them. Then Lena asked, "You understand who I am?" Dana lowered her eyes for a second. "Yes, madam." Lena nodded once, almost sadly. "I thought so." Brooke felt a chill at those words, not because Lena sounded pleased, but because she had expected this point to come. Dana lifted her gaze again. "Executive Operations has been informed. They asked me to confirm your condition and whether you want intervention before landing." For the first time, something shifted faintly in Lena's expression. Not anger, fatigue, perhaps, or old disappointment resurfacing in a familiar shape. "My condition," she repeated softly. "Yes, madam." Lena glanced back toward the cabin, toward rows of people who had shared biscuits, adjusted blankets, minded their own worries, treated her with the rough but ordinary equality of cramped travel. Then she looked toward the front of the plane where business class sat, hidden behind a curtain and a better story about itself. "I am not injured," she said, "only instructed." Dana absorbed that in silence. Lena went on, "And I do not want a public scene." Relief flickered across Dana's face, but it disappeared quickly when Lena added, "That does not mean I want this minimized." "No, madam," Dana said quickly. "I understand." Lena held her gaze. "Do you?" The question landed deep. Dana swallowed. "I am trying to." Lena looked at her for a long second, as though deciding how much truth this woman could bear. When she spoke again, her voice remained soft, but each word carried weight. "I did not board this flight dressed this way by accident. I wanted to see my airline without my name going ahead of me. I wanted to feel the behavior reserved for the poor, the inconvenient, the unadorned. I wanted to know whether our training was changing hearts or merely teaching manners before titles." Dana could not answer, because the answer was already there, walking the aisles. Lena continued, "The problem is not that one wealthy passenger judged me. People like her exist everywhere. The problem is that my staff allowed her judgment to become policy. Brooke felt the truth of that strike all the way where she stood. Lena turned slightly, looking not at Dana now, but toward the unseen cockpit. The captain did not move me because of safety. He moved me because he believed I would be easier to displace than the woman with status. Dana's voice came out smaller than before. Yes, and that Lena said, is the part I wanted to see. For a moment, the only sound was the aircraft itself. Then Dana asked carefully, what would you like us to do now? Lena's eyes returned to hers. Tell the captain that I know, you know. Dana blinked. Only that? Yes, Lena said. He will realize he should. There was no cruelty in her tone, only clarity. Dana hesitated. Would you like to return to business class? Lena's answer came without pause. No. That startled even Brooke. Lena looked back toward her seat. If I move now, everyone learns the wrong lesson. They will think the seat mattered. It did not. Dana stood very still. What matters, Lena continued, is what they chose before they knew. Those words settled over all three women like law. Then Lena added softer, now when we land, there will be consequences, but I want them built on truth, not panic. Dana bowed her head slightly. Yes, madam. Lena's expression eased by the smallest degree. And Dana. The older attendant looked up, startled that Lena knew her name. You were not the first to fail me today, Lena said. Only one more. Dana's face tightened with shame. Lena did not press the wound. She simply returned to her seat, fastened her belt, and folded her hands again as though nothing had been said. Dana remained in the aisle for a moment, gathering herself, then turned and walked back toward the front galley, where Brooke waited. Well, Brooke whispered. Dana's eyes were different now, not frightened exactly, sober, certain. She knows, Dana said. Everything. Yes. Brooke glanced toward the cockpit, and she still does not want a public reveal. No. Why? Dana looked at her with a tired sadness. Because she wants the truth intact. Brooke let that sink in. No scrambling apology, no last-minute performance, no protective rewriting of the story before it reached the ground. Lena was allowing the flight to continue because she wanted every choice to stand where it had been made. Dana inhaled slowly, then straightened her shoulders. I am going to the cockpit now. Brooke nodded, but her stomach tightened because in a few moments Captain Damon Fletcher would learn that the quiet woman he had ordered out of business class was not merely an offended passenger. She was the woman whose vision had built the airline beneath his feet. And worse than that, she had chosen not to rescue him from himself. The cockpit door did not look different from where Dana stood, but the moment felt heavier than any routine knock she had made in her years of service. She adjusted her uniform once more, not for appearance, but to steady her hands, then pressed lightly. Come in, Captain Fletcher's voice called. She stepped inside. The cockpit was filled with quiet precision. Instruments glowed steadily. The sky stretched endlessly ahead through the windshield, clouds forming soft layers beneath them, like a world untouched by the tension inside the cabin. He sat upright, focused, composed, the image of control until he looked at Dana's face. Something in her expression made him turn fully in his seat. What is it? He asked, not irritated this time, alert. Dana closed the door behind her gently. She did not rush her words. Lena had asked for truth, not panic. Captain, she began, her voice low and controlled, I need to inform you of an escalation. He narrowed slightly. About what? Dana held his gaze. The passenger from seat 2A. For a brief second, recognition flickered across his face. Then something else followed. A faint tightening as if the problem he had pushed aside had returned but larger. What about her? He asked. Dana took a breath. Her name is Lena Hargrove. He waited. The name still meant nothing to him. Dana continued carefully, she is not an ordinary passenger. He leaned back slightly, a defensive instinct already rising beneath his calm exterior. We have already resolved that situation. No, sir, Dana said quietly, and we have not. That made him pause. Explain, he said. Dana did not look away. Lena Hargrove is the founder and majority owner of Valor Air. The words settled into the cockpit slowly, too slowly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Captain Fletcher blinked once as though his mind had rejected the sentence and needed to process it again. What? He said almost under his breath. Dana did not repeat it. She did not need to. He stared at her now, searching her face for any sign of exaggeration, misunderstanding, or panic. He found none. That is not possible, he said. It is confirmed through executive operations, Dana replied. Silence filled the cockpit. The kind of silence that does not simply pause conversation, but reshapes the space around it. He turned slowly back toward the instruments in front of him, though he was no longer seeing them clearly. His thoughts began moving too quickly, then too slowly, colliding into each other without order. Founder, owner, the airline, the woman in worn sandals, the woman he had told to move, the woman who had looked at him not with anger, but with recognition. A cold sensation spread through his chest. How certain is this? He asked, and though the answer was already in Dana's tone. Completely certain, she said. He swallowed. His first officer glanced between them, sensing the shift but not yet understanding it. What is going on? Captain Fletcher did not answer immediately because in that moment something far more difficult than shock was taking shape inside him. Clarity, not about her, about himself. He saw the scene again, but now stripped of justification, no longer framed as maintaining order or avoiding delay. Now it stood plainly. He had removed a rightful passenger from her seat because he believed her appearance made her easier to displace than the person complaining. It did not matter who she was. That truth alone was enough. But now she was also the owner, and that changed everything. Not morally, but professionally, consequentially, dangerously. He leaned forward, pressing his fingers lightly against the control panel as if grounding himself. Does she know? He asked. Dana nodded once. Yes. That hit harder than anything else, because if she had known and still remained silent, then this was no longer a mistake hidden in confusion. It was a decision witnessed fully. What has she said? He asked. Dana chose her words carefully, and she does not want a public reveal. He exhaled sharply through his nose, a strange mix of relief and dread colliding inside him. She is still in economy? He asked. Yes, and she has not requested anything. He leaned back again, this time more slowly. The absence of reaction disturbed him more than anger would have. Anger could be managed. Complaints could be handled. But silence chosen. Silence meant something else entirely. It meant observation, judgment, memory. What are executive operations saying? He asked me bourgeois. They have been notified, Dana replied. A ground response team will meet the aircraft. They have instructed us to maintain normal service and inform you discreetly. He let out a quiet, humorless breath. Normal service? He repeated. There was nothing normal about this. His first officer spoke again, more cautiously. Now, Captain, are we dealing with a VIP issue? Captain Fletcher hesitated, then said, We are dealing with something more serious than that. The other pilot nodded slowly, choosing not to press further. He turned his attention back to Dana. Why did not this come up during boarding? Dana met his gaze. Because she chose not to reveal it. That answer landed with uncomfortable precision. He looked away again. Of course, she had not revealed it. That was the entire point. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. In that instant, his mind moved through possible responses. Call her forward, apologize privately, reassign her seat, inform the cabin, make a correction. Each option rose and fell. Too late, too obvious, too performative. Because anything he did now would happen after he knew. And that was the problem. Lena had not needed him to act correctly when it was safe. She had needed him to act correctly when it was unclear, and he had failed. He opened his eyes again. What does she want? He asked quietly. Dana's answer came without hesitation. Truth. He let the words settle. Truth, not comfort, not damage control, not reputation. Truth. Captain Fletcher felt something shift inside him, not panic, not yet, but something heavier than professional concern, accountability. And it did not feel like a concept anymore, it felt like a weight. What exactly did she say? He asked. Dana held his gaze. She said to tell you that she knows. We know. That was enough. He almost let out a bitter laugh, but stopped himself. Of course, she would say it that way. No accusation, no demand, just awareness. A mirror held up to him without forcing him to look. He sat very still. Then slowly he spoke. She is giving me a chance. Dana did not answer, but her silence agreed. His fingers tightened slightly against the armrest. A chance to do what? Apologize, correct the mistake, or simply recognize it without hiding behind authority? He thought back to the exact moment in the aisle. Her words. To avoid delaying the flight, not to do what is right. At the time, he had dismissed them as a challenge. Now they returned as judgment. Captain Fletcher leaned forward again, his voice lower. Now if I go to her now, Dana finished the thought, it will be after you know. He nodded once. Yes. Another long silence followed. Then Captain Fletcher asked the question that mattered most. If she were not the owner, would we be having this conversation? Dana did not hesitate. No. That answer struck with brutal clarity. He closed his eyes again, not to escape, but to face it. Because in that single question, the entire truth of the situation stood exposed. The problem was not that he had offended someone powerful. The problem was that he had treated someone powerless unfairly. And only now, when power had been revealed, did the system begin to react. He opened his eyes slowly. What would you do? He asked Dana. It was not a rhetorical question, it was real. Dana hesitated, surprised by it. Then she answered honestly. I would not fix this because she is the owner. He nodded faintly. And I would fix it because it was wrong. Messasimen. The cockpit seemed quieter. After that, he looked ahead at the endless sky. For the first time since takeoff, the flight no longer felt routine. It felt like a test, not of skill, of character. And the hardest part was not that he had failed. It was that he now had to decide what kind of man he would be after knowing it. For a long moment after Dana left the cockpit, Captain Damon Fletcher did not move. The aircraft continued forward with mechanical certainty. Altitude steady, engines balanced, route locked into a line drawn across invisible airspace. Everything that could be measured remained under control. Everything that mattered had shifted. His first officer glanced at him again, more carefully this time. Captain Fletcher did not respond immediately. His eyes remained forward, but his focus had turned inward, replaying the scene in business class with a clarity that stripped away every excuse he had allowed himself earlier. He saw it now as it truly was, not a disruption, not a customer conflict, a moment of judgment. And in that moment, he had chosen the easier person to move because she looked like she would not resist, because she did not carry visible power, because her dignity had seemed negotiable. He exhaled slowly, the breath heavier than it should have been. His first officer spoke again, quieter now. Sir, is this something we need to prepare? Captain Fletcher finally turned his head. Yes, he does, he said. The younger pilot straightened slightly. How serious? He held his gaze for a second before answering. Serious enough that what we do next will matter more than what already happened. The man nodded, absorbing that without further questions. He looked back at the controls, but his hands remained still. In his career, he had faced storms, mechanical alerts, reroutes, and emergency protocols. Those situations demanded quick decisions guided by training and procedure. Right or wrong, you acted and the system supported you. This was different. There was no manual for what he had just done, no checklist for moral failure. And yet, the consequences could be just as real. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows near the control panel, and let the truth settle fully. If Lena Hargrove had been an ordinary passenger, this would have ended as one more quiet injustice, unrecorded, uncorrected, absorbed by someone with less power and forgotten by everyone else. That thought unsettled him more than her identity, because it meant the system had not failed by accident. It had worked exactly as designed. Captain Fletcher closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again with a different kind of focus. Not defensive, deliberate. He pressed the intercom. "Dana, come back to the cockpit." "On my way, Captain." While he waited, he removed his cap and placed it beside him. A small gesture unnoticed by most, but for him, it carried meaning. Authority had made the decision earlier. Now something else needed to take its place. Dana entered again moments later. "Yes." Captain Fletcher turned toward her fully. "I need you to answer me honestly." "I will." "If she were still just a passenger to you, no title, no power, what should have happened in that aisle?" Dana did not hesitate this time. "She should have kept her seat," she said, "and Madam Harrington should have been reminded that payment does not buy the right to humiliate others." Captain Fletcher nodded once. "And me?" he asked. "What should I have done?" Dana held his gaze. "You should have protected the person who was right." Silence followed, not uncomfortable, just heavy with truth. He leaned back slowly. "Then that is what I will do now." Dana's expression shifted slightly. "Captain, she asked. She asked for no public scene." "I know. And she has not requested her seat back." "I know that too." Dana waited. He continued, choosing his words carefully. "This is not about returning her to business class to make us feel better. That would be correction for appearance, not for truth." Dana nodded faintly. "Then what will you do?" she asked. He looked toward the cockpit door. "I will speak to her, he said. Not as the captain fixing a situation, as the man who made the wrong decision. Dana studied him for a moment, measuring whether this was real or simply controlled damage. "What about Madam Harrington?" she asked. His jaw tightened slightly. "She will be addressed." Captain Fletcher did not answer immediately because here too was a choice. Ignore her behavior, let the flight end quietly, and allow the consequences to be handled by executives later, or confront it now, not harshly, but clearly. He made the decision. "She will be reminded," he said, "that this aircraft does not operate on her approval." Dana allowed herself the smallest breath of relief, not because the situation was solved, but because something had shifted in him. He reached for the intercom again. "Prepare the cabin. I will step out shortly." "Yes, Captain." Dana exited. The cockpit door closed behind her with a soft click. He remained seated for one more second, then he stood. His first officer watched him. "Do you need me to take over?" "I have got it," Captain Fletcher said, then paused. "But stay sharp." "Yes, sir." He adjusted his uniform, but not in the same way he had earlier. Before it had been about authority. Now it felt more like preparation to face something he could not command. He stepped out of the cockpit. The moment his presence entered the business class cabin again, the atmosphere shifted. Passengers looked up. Celeste Harrington noticed immediately. Her posture straightened, expecting confirmation, reinforcement, validation of what had already been done in her favor. "Captain," she said with a small, satisfied smile, "thank you again for resolving that earlier issue." Captain Fletcher stopped beside her row. This time he did not smile. "Madam Harrington," he said evenly, "we need to clarify something." Her expression flickered, just slightly. "Yes." Captain Fletcher kept his voice calm but firm enough for those nearby to hear, without turning the moment into spectacle. "The passenger who was seated beside you had a valid ticket and every right to remain in that seat." Celeste's smile faded. "I believe you misunderstood the situation," he continued, "and I allowed that misunderstanding to influence my decision." A quiet ripple moved through the cabin. Celeste's brows drew together. "Excuse me." He did not raise his voice. "Payment for a seat does not include the authority to remove another passenger based on personal judgment." Her face hardened. "Captain, I think you are overreacting." "No, madam," he said, cutting in gently but firmly. "I am correcting." The word landed differently, not aggressive, but final. Celeste looked around, suddenly aware of the eyes on her. "You are saying I was wrong?" she asked. Captain Fletcher met her gaze. "Yes." The cabin fell into a deeper silence. Celeste's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. For the first time since boarding, she had no immediate control over the narrative. He held the moment just long enough for the truth to settle, then he stepped back. "I will speak with the passenger," he said. He did not wait for her response because this part was no longer about her. He moved past the curtain into economy. The air felt different here, less polished, more real. Passengers glanced up as he entered, some surprised to see the captain walking through the narrow aisle instead of remaining behind the invisible boundary of class. He moved slowly, scanning faces until he found her. Lena Hargrove. She was exactly where Dana had said, seated calmly, hands resting lightly in her lap as if she had been expecting him. He stopped beside her row. For a second he said nothing. Not because he did not know what to say, but because he understood that whatever he said next would define not just this moment, but who he chose to be after it. Lena looked up at him. Their eyes met again. This time he did not look away first. "Madam," he said quietly. She waited. Captain Fletcher took a breath. Not as a pilot, as a man. "I made the wrong decision." No explanation, no justification, just truth. The words settled between them. Simple, heavy, real. Lena studied him for a moment, then she asked softly, "Before or after you knew who I am?" The question struck exactly where it needed to. He did not hesitate. "Before," he said, "and I'm only admitting it now because I understand it fully." Lena held his gaze, searching not for perfection, for honesty. Around them, the cabin seemed to fade. Passengers sensed something important was happening, though they did not yet understand what. Silence gathered again. Not the silence of judgment this time, the silence of truth being faced. And in that narrow aisle at 30,000 feet above the ground, the real test had finally begun. The aisle seemed to hold its breath. Passengers nearby sensed the shift, even if they did not understand it. A captain standing in economy, speaking quietly to a poorly dressed woman, this alone was unusual. But there was something in the stillness between them that made it clear this was not routine. Lena did not look away. She studied Captain Fletcher's face the way one studies something fragile, not to break it, but to see whether it would hold. "You understand it fully now?" she repeated softly. "Yes. And what exactly do you understand?" He did not rush to answer, because the truth once spoken would not return to silence. "I understand," he said slowly, "that I did not move you because of procedure. I moved you because I assumed you would be easier to displace than the person who complained." The words felt heavier in the air than they had inside the cockpit. Lena's expression did not change much, but something in her eyes shifted. Recognition, not of him alone, of a pattern she had seen many times. "And if I had remained silent," she asked, "and you never discovered who I am, would you still be standing here?" Captain Fletcher held her gaze. This was the moment he could protect himself. He could say yes. He could claim that conscience alone had brought him here. It would sound right, it would sound noble, and it would not be entirely true. "No, he said. The honesty landed like a quiet crack in the structure of the moment. Lena nodded once. "Then we are not talking about correction," she said. "We are talking about consequence." He accepted that without resistance. "Yes." A small movement came from the row behind them as someone adjusted in their seat, trying not to stare too openly. The little boy across the aisle looked between them, curiously sensing the seriousness without understanding it. Lena glanced briefly at him, then back at Captain Fletcher. "Tell me something," she said. "When you stood in that aisle earlier, what did you see when you looked at me?" Bisan, he did not answer immediately. He forced himself to remember exactly, not what he knew now, what he saw then. "A passenger who looked out of place in business class," he said. "And what does out of place mean to you?" Lena asked. He hesitated, then answered. "Someone whose appearance does not match the expectations of that environment." Lena nodded slowly. "So the environment decides the person?" "No," Captain Fletcher said quickly, then stopped because earlier that was exactly what he had allowed. Lena watched him come to that realization. Then she spoke again, her voice still calm but carrying something deeper now. "I built this airline from the ground up," she said. "Not from boardrooms, from floors like these, from spaces where people were invisible unless they made a mistake." He listened without interrupting. "I have cleaned terminals where people stepped around me as if I were part of the building," she continued. "I have been spoken to without eye contact, dismissed without thought, measured without knowing." Her gaze did not harden. It deepened. "And today," she said, "I wanted to see if anything had changed." Silence followed, not empty, heavy with what that meant. He felt something tighten in his chest and he asked quietly. Lena held his gaze. "What I saw," she said, "was that people have learned to behave correctly when they recognize power, but not when they encounter vulnerability." The truth of that spread through the space like something undeniable. Captain Fletcher had no answer for it because he was part of that truth. Lena continued, "Your training teaches you to maintain order, to protect the experience of passengers." His voice was low. "Respect?" Lena tilted her head slightly. "For whom?" The question cut deeper than any accusation. He exhaled slowly. "For everyone," he said, "but not equally," Lena replied. Again, he had no defense. Around them, the cabin remained quiet. Even those pretending not to listen were listening because something in Lena's voice did not sound like anger. It sounded like something far more difficult. Disappointment. Lena glanced down briefly at her hands, then back up. "When Madame Harrington spoke," she said, "she did not surprise me. People like her exist in every system. What mattered to me was what my staff would do next." He felt the weight of that sentence settle directly on him. "And what did we do?" he asked. Lena did not answer immediately. She let the silence speak first. Then she said, "You chose convenience over fairness. Simple, precise, unavoidable." He nodded once. "Yes." Another pause, then Lena asked, "Do you think you are a bad man, Captain?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he said honestly. "Neither do I," Lena replied. That surprised him. "But I think you made a bad decision," she continued. "And more importantly, I think you made it for a reason that exists beyond this moment." He listened. "You made it because you believed the system would support that choice," she said. He could not deny it. "Because the system often did." Lena's voice softened slightly. "That is what I came to see." He looked down briefly, then back at her. "And now that you have seen it," he asked. Lena leaned back slightly in her seat. "Considering now," she said, "I have to decide what to do with that truth." The words hung in the air, not as a threat, as reality. He felt the full weight of consequence for the first time, not just for himself, but for everyone connected to that decision, the crew, the culture, the airline, everything. "I am prepared to accept responsibility," he said. Lena studied him. "What does that mean to you?" "It means I will not hide what happened," he said, "and I will accept whatever outcome follows." Lena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "Even if I were not the owner?" Captain Fletcher answered without hesitation. "Yes." And this time it felt true because something had shifted inside him, not because of her title, but because of the truth she had forced him to face. Lena seemed to sense that, not perfectly, but enough. She nodded once. "Good," she said. The word was quiet, but it carried weight. Relief did not follow because this was not the end. It was only the point where honesty had finally entered the story. "Yeah." He glanced toward the front of the plane. Go back to your cockpit, Captain, she said. Captain Fletcher hesitated. And you? I will remain here. He looked at her uncertain. Are you sure? Lena's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. This seat is as real as the one in front, she said. I have seen what I needed to see. He nodded slowly. Then after a brief pause, he said, I am sorry. Not formally, not as procedure, as truth. Lena inclined her head slightly. I know, she said, and for the first time since the flight began, the silence between them felt different. Not empty, not tense, but honest. Captain Fletcher stepped back into the aisle. Passengers shifted slightly as he moved past, some curious, some thoughtful, some uncomfortable without knowing why. He did not look back immediately because he knew that whatever came next would not be decided in this aisle. It would be decided on the ground in consequences, in changes, in whether truth would actually reshape anything or be softened into something easier to live with. Behind him, Lena sat quietly again, not defeated, not triumphant, simply present. And ahead beyond the cockpit door, the flight continued toward a landing that would not be ordinary for anyone on board. The aircraft continued its steady path through the sky, but inside nothing felt steady anymore. In business class, the mood had changed subtly, but unmistakably, where earlier there had been relaxed entitlement. Now there was a faint tension beneath every movement. Conversations were quieter. Laughter came shorter. Even the clink of glassware seemed more cautious, as though the cabin itself had become aware of something unspoken. Madame Celeste Harrington sat upright, her phone resting in her lap, her expression carefully controlled. But the composure she wore now was not the same as before. It lacked ease. It carried awareness. She had not missed the shift in the captain's tone. She had not missed the way he had said, "You were wrong." And more than anything, she had not missed what came after his silence. Because silence in moments like this often meant something larger was moving beneath the surface. Celeste adjusted the sleeve of her outfit, her fingers lingering longer than necessary. The man beside her leaned slightly closer. "What was that about?" he murmured. Celeste forced a small smile. "Nothing serious," she said, "just overcorrection." But even as she spoke, her mind had already begun to search backward through the day. The woman, the way she stood, the way she did not react, the way she looked at the captain. Celeste had seen many kinds of people in her life, those who begged, those who argued, those who tried to prove themselves, those who shrank under pressure. But that woman had done none of those things. And now, for the first time, a quiet discomfort settled into her thoughts. Who was she? Back in economy, the atmosphere was different, less controlled, more human. Passengers had relaxed into the rhythm of the flight. Some slept, some watched movies, some ate slowly, stretching the small comfort of a meal into something longer. Lena remained in her seat, calm as before. But something had shifted, not in her, but around her. The captain's presence had not gone unnoticed. Whispers moved quietly between rows. Why was he talking to her? Is she someone important? I saw her earlier. Was not there an issue? People did not know the truth, but they felt its shadow. Lena ignored the murmurs. Her gaze rested lightly on the window, though she was not looking at the clouds. She was thinking not about revenge, not about humiliation, about patterns. What she had seen today was not new. It was simply clearer than usual. When power was absent, people revealed themselves without effort. When power entered, behavior corrected itself, but not always character. And that difference mattered because organizations could be built on rules, but cultures were built on instincts, and instinct had spoken loudly on this flight. In the forward galley, Brooke moved through her duties with mechanical precision, refilling trays, checking passenger needs, responding to call lights, but her mind remained elsewhere. She replayed Lena's words again and again. What matters is what they chose before they knew. It unsettled her because it stripped away every excuse. No misunderstanding, no confusion, just choice. Brooke stopped briefly beside the service cart, her hands resting against its edge. What happens now? She murmured. Dana, standing across from her, heard the question. That depends, she said quietly. On what? On whether the truth changes anything. Brooke frowned. It has to. Dana gave a small, tired shake of her head. Not always. Brooke looked at her, surprised. You do not believe anything will change. Dana met her gaze. I believe change is possible. I just know it rarely happens because of a single moment. Brooke thought about that. Then she said, But this is not just a moment. No, Dana agreed. It is not. They both knew that because this moment carried weight beyond itself, it carried exposure, and exposure, if not buried, could force transformation. In the cockpit, Captain Damon Fletcher sat with a different kind of focus. Now the technical side of the flight remained smooth. Systems were stable. Communication with air traffic control was routine. But beneath that, his thoughts continued to turn. Not in confusion, in reflection. He had already accepted that his decision was wrong. That part was clear. What remained unclear was what came after. Because acknowledging a mistake was not the same as repairing its impact. He had spoken to Lena. He had admitted fault. But the system that allowed that decision to happen still existed, and he was part of that system. Captain Fletcher leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his knees. His first officer glanced at him. You spoke to her. Yes. And Captain Fletcher paused. She already knew everything she needed to know. The other pilot nodded slowly. That sounds serious. It is. Another moment of silence passed. Then Captain Fletcher said something unexpected. We train for emergencies all the time, he said. Engine failure, weather diversion, system malfunction. His first officer looked at him curious. But we do not train for this. He continued. For the moment when you realize you made the wrong decision for the right-sounding reason. The younger pilot did not respond immediately, because there was no easy answer. Back in business class, Celeste shifted in her seat again. She had tried to return to her normal routine. Checking messages, reviewing notes, planning her arrival, but something would not settle. She replayed the captain's words. Payment does not include the authority to remove another passenger. The statement had been simple, but it carried something she was not used to hearing. Limits. Celeste had built her life on influence, on access, on the ability to shape environments to her comfort, and usually it worked. But now something had resisted, not loudly but clearly. She glanced toward the curtain separating business class from the rest of the plane. For the first time since the incident, she felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not yet uncertainty, and that unsettled her more than anything. Time passed. The aircraft began its gradual descent. A soft announcement came over the speakers informing passengers of their approach to the city. Seatbacks straightened, tray tables lifted, belts fastened. The routine returned. But beneath it, tension remained because everyone sensed in different ways that this flight would not end quietly. In economy, Lena adjusted her seatbelt and rested her hands again in her lap. Her face remained calm, but her thoughts had reached a conclusion. Not emotional, decisive. She had seen enough, not just from the captain, not just from Celeste, from the system itself, from how quickly dignity could be negotiated when appearance did not match expectation, from how silence enabled it, from how easily people adapted once power was revealed. The aircraft lowered through the clouds. The city began to appear below. Roads, rooftops, movement, life continuing as it always did. Lena looked out at it. This was where everything had begun for her, and now it was where something would change. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. In the forward galley, Brooke stood beside Dana again. They are coming to meet the plane, Brooke said quietly, referring to the executive response team. Yes, Dana replied. What do you think will happen? Dana looked toward the cabin, then toward the cockpit, then back at Brooke. I think, she said slowly, we are about to find out whether this company is built on image or on truth. Brooke nodded. Because that was exactly what this moment had become, a test. Not just for individuals, for everything. As the landing gear deployed and the aircraft prepared to touch down, Captain Fletcher placed his hands on the controls with steady precision. His training took over, his focus sharpened. But beneath that, something remained. Awareness. Because he knew that once the wheels touched the ground, the real consequences would begin. Not in the sky, on the ground where decisions could no longer hide behind altitude and routine. The runway approached, the aircraft descended, and inside every person who had been part of that moment, whether they acted, stayed silent, or simply watched, was about to step into a reality where the truth would no longer be quiet. The wheels touched the runway with a firm, controlled thud. For most passengers, it was just another landing, another end to a routine journey. A few people clapped softly out of habit. Seatbelts remained fastened, phones were already in hands, screens lighting up as signals slowly returned. Conversations resumed in low tones, plans for arrival unfolding. But beneath that normal rhythm, something else moved quietly through the aircraft. Awareness. The plane taxied toward the terminal, engines humming with restrained power. Outside, ground vehicles shifted into position, baggage carts, fuel trucks, service crews, everything appeared ordinary. Inside, it was not. In business class, Madame Celeste Harrington sat still, her usual composure replaced by a sharper attentiveness. She had barely spoken since the captain's correction. The man beside her had stopped asking questions. Even those who had quietly supported her earlier now avoided eye contact, sensing that the balance had shifted in a way they did not fully understand. Celeste looked toward the front of the plane, her mind working quickly. Something was wrong, not with the flight, with the situation. The captain's tone had not been defensive. It had been deliberate, and that meant he knew something she did not. Her fingers tightened slightly around her handbag. Who was that woman? In economy, Lena remained seated even as passengers around her began preparing to stand. She did not reach for her bag. She did not move toward the aisle. She simply waited, calm, composed, as if she understood that what came next did not require urgency. The little boy across the aisle looked at her again. "We have landed," he said softly, as though sharing important news. Lena smiled faintly. "Yes," she replied. His mother gave a polite nod, still unsure what to make of the earlier moment with the captain. Something had clearly happened, but not enough for her to understand it fully. Lena returned her gaze forward. She could feel it now. The shift, not just inside the aircraft, beyond it. At the front, the aircraft door remained closed longer than usual. Passengers noticed. Whispers began. "Why are not we deboarding? Is there a delay? Maybe something with ground staff." But the crew said nothing because they were waiting, and then a soft knock came from the outside of the aircraft door. Dana stood ready. She glanced once toward the cockpit, nodded. The door opened. Two individuals stepped in, not hurried, not loud, but with a quiet authority that did not need announcement. A man in a dark suit, mid-50s, composed and observant, and a woman beside him, younger, carrying a tablet, her posture precise. They were not airline staff in the usual sense, they were something else, executive operations. The air in the cabin changed instantly, not visibly, but perceptibly. The man spoke quietly to Dana. "We are here for Miss Hargrove." Dana nodded. "She is in economy." That alone made the woman beside him glance up sharply. "In economy," she repeated. "Yes." A brief silence passed between them, not confusion, understanding. Then the man nodded once. "Take us to her." The movement through the aircraft was subtle but impossible to ignore. Passengers turned their heads as the two figures walked past business class without stopping. Celeste noticed immediately. Her eyes followed them. Something in her chest tightened. They did not even glance at her. They did not pause. They moved past straight toward the curtain and then into economy. Lena saw them before they reached her. She did not stand. She did not wave. She simply watched as they approached. The man stopped beside her row. For a brief moment, he said nothing. Then, with a quiet respect that contrasted sharply with everything that had happened earlier, he inclined his head. "Madam Hargrove." The words were not loud, but they carried. Passengers nearby froze. The little boy blinked. His mother's eyes widened. The elderly man lowered his newspaper slowly. Lena met the man's gaze. "Marcus," she said calmly. The familiarity of the name confirmed everything. Not speculation, not rumor, truth. The woman beside Marcus stepped slightly forward, her voice equally controlled. "We have been informed of the situation, ma'am." Lena nodded once. "Yes. Would you like to move forward?" the woman asked. Lena shook her head. "No." That answer surprised even Marcus. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we can arrange." "I said no," Lena repeated, still calm. Silence followed, not tense, final. Marcus accepted it immediately. "Of course." Passengers around them stared openly now. Whispers spread rapidly. "Did he say Hargrove? Is that—" "No, it cannot be." But it was, and realization moved through the cabin like a slow wave. Back in business class, the absence of those figures had become louder than their presence. Celeste shifted again, no longer able to maintain her earlier composure. "Where did they go?" she asked aloud. No one answered, because everyone already knew. They had gone past her to someone else. In the cockpit, Captain Fletcher remained seated, listening to the subtle change in cabin noise through the closed door. He did not need to see it. He knew the truth had arrived, and now it was visible. He closed his eyes briefly, not in fear, in acceptance. In economy, Marcus spoke again. "Ma'am, the ground team is ready. We can escort you off first." Lena looked around the cabin, at the passengers, at the ordinary space she had chosen to remain in. Then she said, "No." Another pause. "I will leave with everyone else." The woman beside Marcus hesitated. "Ma'am, that is not necessary." Lena's gaze was steady. Neither was what happened earlier. The words landed with quiet force. Marcus nodded slowly. Understood. He stepped back, not correcting, not insisting, because this was no longer about protocol. It was about principle. The announcement came shortly after. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived. Please remain seated as we begin deboarding." The door opened fully. Passengers in business class were expected to leave first. That was the order, the system, the structure. But now everything felt different because the woman who owned the airline was sitting in economy, waiting, not rushing forward, not reclaiming status, just waiting. And that changed how everyone else moved. Celeste stood up quickly as soon as the seatbelt sign turned off. She adjusted her outfit, her posture returning to something closer to control. But it was not the same because now she knew, or at least she suspected enough. As she stepped into the aisle, her eyes flicked once more toward the curtain. For the first time since the flight began, she felt something unfamiliar. Not power, not certainty, exposure. Passengers began to exit one by one, row by row. The usual order continued. But the meaning had shifted because somewhere behind them, seated calmly among ordinary people, was the woman who had seen everything and chosen to say nothing. Until now, Lena waited until the aisle cleared near her row. Then she stood, picked up her bag, and stepped forward. No announcement, no escort, just presence. But this time, everyone saw her differently, not because she had changed, but because they had. The line moved slowly toward the open door. Passengers stepped forward in measured rhythm, collecting bags, adjusting clothing, returning to the version of themselves they would present once outside the aircraft. Conversations resumed in fragments, calls being planned, rides confirmed, meetings anticipated. But even as the routine of arrival unfolded, something underneath it refused to return to normal. because knowledge had changed the space and knowledge could not be undone. Lena walked with the others. No one stopped her. No one rushed her. But people noticed. They moved slightly aside as she passed, not dramatically, not openly, but enough to reveal the shift. The same woman who had been invisible earlier was now seen, not differently in appearance, but differently in meaning. The little boy watched her go with quiet fascination. His mother gently pulled him forward, her own eyes lowered, now thoughtful in a way they had not been before. Behind them, Brooke stood near the galley, observing everything. She did not move yet. She was waiting, not for instruction, for understanding. Because this moment, the way people adjusted themselves after truth appeared, was as important as what had happened before it. In business class, Celeste Harrington stepped into the aisle with controlled precision. Her posture was still upright, her chin still slightly lifted, but the confidence that had defined her earlier now carried tension beneath it. She had heard enough, seen enough. The name, the recognition, the way the executive team had walked past her without pause. There was no longer room for denial. As the line moved forward, she found herself closer to the curtain, closer to the space where everything had changed. Her eyes shifted once more, and then she saw her, Lena Hargrove, walking calmly forward. Not escorted, not elevated, just present. Celeste's breath caught for the smallest fraction of a second. That woman, the same one she had pointed at, dismissed, removed, now revealed as something entirely different. Celeste's mind raced. What could she say? What should she say? An apology? A justification? Silence. For the first time in a long time, she did not know. The line paused briefly. A small delay at the door. Passengers stood close now, within reach of each other. No more distance, no more separation of cabins. And in that compressed space, Celeste found herself standing only a few steps behind Lena, close enough to speak, close enough to remain silent. Her hand tightened around her handbag. She hesitated. Then, "Madam?" The word came out softer than she expected. Lena turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world narrowed. No audience, no titles, just two women. One who had judged, one who had been judged. Celeste swallowed. "I did not know," she said. The sentence felt small, insufficient, but it was what came. Lena studied her. Not harshly, not kindly, clearly. "Yes," she said. Nothing more. No anger, no comfort, just acknowledgement. Celeste felt something tighten in her chest. "I would not have," she began, then stopped because the rest of that sentence did not hold. Would not have what? Judged, complained, demanded. The truth was, she had acted exactly as she believed she had the right to act, and only now, knowing who Lena was, did that belief feel unstable. Lena tilted her head slightly. "You would not have done what?" she asked. Celeste had no answer because any answer would expose the same thing that her behavior had depended on, who she believed Lena to be. And that was the problem. Lena saw it, and she did not press further. She simply turned back toward the door because the lesson was already there. No need to repeat it. The line moved again. Passengers stepped out into the bright light of the jet bridge one by one, routine continuing but altered. At the front of the aircraft, Marcus and the executive team waited just beyond the door, not obstructing, not controlling, just present, watching. As Lena stepped forward, they straightened slightly, not dramatically, respectfully. Lena exited the aircraft. The transition from cabin to jet bridge brought a shift in air and light in space, but not in her pace. She continued walking, calm, measured. Behind her, Captain Fletcher emerged from the cockpit. He did not rush. He did not hide. He stepped into the same line, into the same space, no longer separated by role. Just another person moving toward consequence. Passengers glanced at him. some curious, some aware, some simply moving on. But he felt it, the weight of what waited ahead. As he stepped into the jet bridge, he saw them, the executive team, Lena standing slightly ahead, and for a moment he stopped. Not physically, but internally, because this was the point where everything became real. No altitude, no distance, no delay, just ground and truth. Marcus stepped forward first. "Captain Fletcher," he said. He met his gaze. "Yes, we will need a full report of the incident." He nodded. "You will have it." Marcus studied him for a moment, then glanced toward Lena. She had not turned. She was looking ahead, waiting, not for apology, for outcome. Marcus stepped aside. "This way, please." They moved through the jet bridge together, not as separate roles, as participants in the same moment. Brooke and Dana followed at a distance, quiet, observing, learning. At the end of the jet bridge, the terminal opened, bright, busy, unaware. Travelers moved in every direction, unaware that within this small group something significant had already unfolded. Lena stepped forward, then stopped. She turned, not toward the crowd, toward Captain Fletcher. Their eyes met again one last time before everything shifted to a different space. "You understand now?" she said. It was not a question. He nodded. "Yes." Lena held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she said, "Good," and turned away. She walked forward into the terminal, not surrounded, not announced, just present. But the space around her moved differently now because truth had already done its work. Captain Fletcher remained still for a second, then followed. Not as captain, not as authority, but as someone stepping into consequence. Behind them, Celeste exited the aircraft. She paused briefly at the threshold, looking ahead, watching Lena walk away. For the first time, she did not move forward immediately because something inside her had shifted. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough to feel the weight of what had happened, enough to recognize that the problem had never been who Lena was, but how she herself had chosen to see her. And as the terminal absorbed them all into its movement, one thing had become clear. This was no longer about a seat. It was about what people reveal when they believe no one important is watching. The executive lounge at Horizon International Airport had always been a place of quiet separation, soft lighting, leather chairs, polished floors that reflected only those who had permission to be there. It was designed for comfort, for privacy, for decisions made behind glass instead of in public spaces. But that day it felt different. Not because the room had changed, because the truth had arrived inside it. Lena Hargrove stood near the window, looking out over the runway where aircraft moved in slow, deliberate patterns. Her reflection in the glass was faint, almost blending into the brightness beyond. She had not changed her clothes. She had not adjusted her appearance. She remained exactly as she had been on the plane. And that in itself had become a statement. Behind her, the room had filled quietly. Marcus stood to one side, tablet in hand, reviewing notes. Two members of the executive response team waited near the entrance. Dana and Brooke remained near the back, unsure whether they belonged in this space, yet unable to leave. And near the center of the room, Captain Damon Fletcher stood alone. No cockpit, no uniform authority, just a man facing the consequence of his own decision. No one spoke at first because everyone understood that this moment did not need noise. It needed clarity. Lena turned slowly from the window. Her gaze moved across the room, not searching, not judging, simply acknowledging each person present. Then it settled on Captain Fletcher. "Tell me what happened," she said. The question was simple, but it carried weight, not because she did not know, but because she wanted to hear it from him. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at the others. He looked only at her. "There was a complaint from a business class passenger," he began. "She believed you did not belong in that section." Lena said nothing. He continued, "I verified your ticket. It was valid. There was no procedural issue. He paused, then forced himself to continue without softening the truth. I made the decision to move you anyway. The room remained silent. No interruption, no reaction, just listening. I told myself it was to avoid conflict, he said, to prevent delay, to maintain order. His voice remained steady, but something beneath it had shifted. Those reasons were not the truth, he added. Lena's eyes did not leave his face. What was the truth? She asked. Captain Fletcher answered without hesitation. I believed you would be easier to displace than the passenger who complained. The words settled into the room, heavy, unavoidable. No one moved, because there was nothing to soften them. Lena nodded once. And why did you believe that? His jaw tightened slightly. Because of how you looked, he said. The honesty did not come easily, but it came fully. Lena let a moment pass before speaking again. And what does that say about your judgment? He did not look away. That it is flawed, he said. Not just flawed, Lena replied. Conditioned, yeah, she said. The word shifted the meaning from individual mistake to something deeper. Captain Fletcher absorbed it. Yes, he said quietly. Lena walked slowly across the room, not toward him, around the space, as if placing her thoughts before she spoke them. When I was younger, she said, I worked in spaces like this without ever being seen. Her voice was calm, measured, but I saw everything. She continued, how people spoke, who they respected, who they ignored, what they believed about those who served them. She paused briefly, then looked at him again. Success changes how the world sees you, she said, but it does not change what the world believes about those without it. No one interrupted because everyone understood. Lena stopped near the center of the room. This airline was not built to mirror that belief, she said. It was built to challenge it. Her gaze moved briefly to Marcus, then back to Captain Fletcher. And today, she continued, I tested whether that belief had changed inside my own company. The answer did not need to be spoken. It had already been shown. Captain Fletcher stood still, not defending, not explaining, just listening, because now explanation would only weaken truth. Lena took a slow breath, then asked, What do you think should happen now? The question surprised him, not because he had not expected consequence, but because she was asking him to define it. He considered it carefully, then answered, I think I should be held accountable. He said, How? Lena asked. Through whatever process you believe is appropriate. That was the expected answer, safe, structured. But Lena did not respond immediately because she was not asking for procedure. She was asking for understanding. That is responsibility, she said, not consequence. He frowned slightly. What is the difference? He asked. Lena held his gaze. Responsibility is accepting what you did, she said. Consequence is understanding why it matters. The distinction settled into the room and into him. Captain Fletcher thought about that not quickly, not defensively, deeply. Then he said, It matters because if I made that decision once, I can make it again. Lena nodded. And because others may do the same if nothing changes. Yes. And because, he added, it reflects something larger than me. Lena's expression softened slightly, not with approval, with recognition. Now you understand, she said. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, complete. Lena turned slightly toward Marcus. Prepare a full internal review, she said, not just of this incident. Marcus nodded immediately. Yes, ma'am. Focus on training, she continued, not procedures, judgment. Yes, ma'am. Then she looked back at Captain Fletcher. You will not be dismissed, she said. That surprised everyone in the room, even Captain Fletcher. But she continued before anyone could speak. Because removing you does not remove the problem, she said. It only hides it. The logic was clear, unavoidable. But you will be held accountable, she added. He nodded once. I understand. Lena stepped closer, not intimidating, not distant, direct. "You will participate in that review," she said. Not as captain, he waited, as a case study. The words landed with precision, not humiliation. Exposure. He felt them fully and accepted them. "Yes," he said. Lena held his gaze for one final moment, then she stepped back. The decision had been made. Not dramatic, not loud, but final. She turned toward the exit. The meeting was over. Not because everything was resolved, but because everything had been seen. As she walked toward the door, Brooke felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not closure, something stronger, understanding. That change did not come from punishment. It came from truth being faced without disguise. Dana exhaled quietly beside her. "We will not forget this," Brooke whispered. Dana shook her head slightly. "No," she said, "we will not." Behind them, Captain Fletcher remained where he stood. Not broken, not unchanged, but aware. More than before, enough to know that what happened next would matter more than what had already happened. Outside, the airport moved as it always did. Flights arriving, flights departing, people coming and going, unaware. But somewhere within that movement, something had shifted. Not in the system alone, in the people inside it. And that was where real change always began. Not with power, but with truth. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life do not come from being seen at your highest, but from being seen at your lowest when no one believes you matter. Because that is when people reveal who they truly are, not when they recognize your name, but when they do not. Lena Hargrove did not need to prove her worth. She needed to reveal the truth. And in doing so, she reminded everyone of something simple yet often forgotten. Respect is not something we give to power. It is something we owe to humanity. So today, ask yourself, how do you treat people when you believe they have nothing to offer you? Because that answer says everything. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of truth, justice, and humanity.